Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for this live session in the Channel Expert Hour. We really appreciate you taking some time out to join us. And in addition to your questions and answers today, we are joined by an expert from AccelOps. They're going to be taking us through the concept and the topic of compliance as a service. This is something that we've seen from an end customer research point of view really accelerating in terms of priority for their operational dynamics, and it's also been proven to be a very lucrative business opportunity for managed service providers. So we're very glad you could join us for today's conversation, and we really hope that this is valuable and actionable information for you guys. By way of introduction, my name is Ryan Morris, and I am a contributing editor on the Penton Technology team. I am going to be taking you through the introduction and then passing off to our expert for today's session, and then I will rejoin again at the end for the question and answer period. Please do take note as we get started here that we want this to be as interactive a process as possible. You'll notice in your interface there's a widget bar at the bottom of the screen where you see a number of icons. I want to particularly point out to you that red button, the Q&A box. That box is live beginning now and will remain live throughout today's conversation. So if you have any questions or comments, reactions to the things that we're going through, please feel free to submit those at any point in time, and then we will go through as many of them as we can at the end of the session. And any that you submit today that we don't have time for, those will actually be passed on to the expert, and we'll have those answered electronically after the session. So no shortage of opportunity for you to ask and get answers here. In addition, you'll notice the Twitter icon there. We definitely invite you to join us in the larger conversation and help share these topics with your community of followers and connections out there in the Twitterverse. You click on that, it will allow you to send out information and big ideas, key statistics, and things that you learn during the conversation without leaving the interface. So it makes it really easy to really share and disseminate this kind of information. Before we get started, we often get a lot of questions about the interface, particularly the size of the window where you're viewing those slides. That is totally customizable in your interface, so you can click and drag to make that larger or to reposition, depending on what you have going on your screen. Make sure you customize that so you can see all the details on the slide. By way of introduction, then, as we look at today's conversation, we're going to be talking about a number of topics, but specifically focusing in on three main areas. The first one is understanding the latest trends and industry dynamics associated with IT security. We all know this is a high priority for our customers, and we know that the topic is always changing and the threats are always evolving. So this is something that really pays to stay current on and really keep your skills sharp and up to date on the latest best practices. Then we're going to take a look at emerging security threats that are specifically associated with new technology platforms. When you think cloud or hybrid environments or emerging Internet of Things devices that are out there in the world, the kinds and types of security threats that we're seeing emerge are different, they are new, and they are usually not covered by traditional security protocols. So we want to make sure that you guys are aware of how that's going to begin to impact your customers and how you can start to anticipate those challenges in your environment. Third, then we're going to talk about building a business practice around this, and I really like this idea of compliance as a service. We know that it's complex for your customers. They usually don't have time or on-staff resources that are experts in doing this, and it's usually pretty difficult for an MSP to just simply say, I'll provide you with some security services. When we can package things and label them and put them into a real practice offering, our credibility goes up and the customer confidence is much, much higher. So we definitely want to take a look at how you guys can build a business opportunity around this and turn it into real and long-lasting revenue. To take us through today's conversation, Mike Reinhardt is the Director of Product Marketing for AccelOps. He's going to take us through the details and the research information and show us how to begin to build this practice offering. Mike, let me turn the time over to you.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So for those of you who aren't familiar with AccelOps, we are a software platform, a virtual appliance that does a number of security-related monitoring, management, and compliance and performance correlation of analytics. We're going to talk about a subset of that today, and some of the capabilities that we're already seeing our customers use in terms of building a business plan around certain components of our product offering. In looking at some of the attendee list, I noticed that we have a number of service providers. This is really kind of targeted toward that audience. This is where we're seeing a lot of traction, where we also see a lot of opportunity to help those companies grow and add additional value to the customer relationships they have today. Some of the things that drive MSPs is that the customers' environments have disparate systems. There's different goals, different strategies going on within an organization. Hardware and software is being purchased in different silos. You've got things coming into the network that may or may not be planned for, difficult to manage. A rapidly evolving threat landscape, so things like the Internet of Things, bring your own device, etc., create a dynamic environment that's difficult to manage unless you have good fences built into that. And then managing compliance standards, where we'll focus today, that seems to be a growing area for needs to be fulfilled. We have a number of managed service providers using our solution today and other solutions to really help businesses lead through that process. They typically don't have the resources, both in terms of tools and personnel, to manage those types of things. To kind of keep on that theme, the physical infrastructures are changing. You've got virtual infrastructures coming to the world as well, multiple different types of clouds, as I mentioned before, the bring your own device, but then the Internet of Things, we're starting to see more and more that becoming a concern with both companies, but also an opportunity for managed service providers to find ways to add value. And just to talk about some of the security trends that we're seeing, these are based on some recent surveys that were done. The challenges that many businesses are feeling. This is a study of about 2,000 businesses. They were asked whether they had been either breached or had a network problem over this past year. This is just for 2015. 47% of them had experienced at least a material breach to the network or to their systems. The other scary thing is that it takes, on average, about 256 days to detect an attack. The good news around that is that's less than it was last year, but the bad news is that third data point, which is that 81% of those breaches weren't discovered by the business themselves, but by an outside entity. So, for example, a customer's credit card got compromised, quickly sees their balance going up. They call their credit card company. The credit card company backtracks where they shopped with that credit card to determine where that breach might have occurred, and then they're calling that business saying, hey, your systems have leaked data about my customer, so it's a little embarrassing to the business that has been breached, but it's not a very uncommon event. As you can see, only 20% of those breaches are discovered by the business themselves. What's driving a lot of these attacks, too, is important to look at. So for credit card data, on average, hackers are able to get between $4 and $12 per card in reselling that data on the market. The fulls, which is a kind of an industry slang word for getting not only the credit card data, the expiration data, but also the user's social security number, billing address, mailing address, which adds additional value to that stolen information. And then the other trend we're seeing is the electronic health record data going up. That's a big area of hacking today and a big area of threat. What's happening is the healthcare industry is moving from printed files, reams and files of paper data, and having to put that into electronic format, which then creates an environment for hackers to be able to get access to that information. And electronic health records are very lucrative to hackers, so we've seen a tremendous uptick in the healthcare industry recently getting breaches to their environments, which is kind of why we're picking on that as one of the potential service offerings that you could provide as a managed service provider. Just to talk about what is the impact on a business when their network is breached? So whether you're a doctor's office or a retail store, what's the impact on your customer relationships? Because that's really a big factor in driving why you need to have these things in place. Yes, you've got regulatory things that you need to support, but it's also, how do I stay in business? How do I keep the revenue flowing? You can see by this recent study that over 80% of those customers who shopped with a business that had been compromised, 30%, it took 6 months before they came back to that business. Another 50% either took a year or they still don't want to deal with that company anymore. So that impacts your bottom line, impacts your customer relationship. People that are compromised traditionally will tell 5 other people, so you kind of create a negative advertising campaign by not being compliant and having the security measures in place to help deal with that. That's also true of suppliers as well. Current environments in many IT shops, there's a number of different departments. Each has their own leaders, their own goals. You've also got various lines of business with cloud-based technology that's running in their business. As you saw before, 81% of those businesses that were breached didn't know that until somebody told them. And typically the resolution process is a very reactive post-issue forensics investigation. So it's literally people coming in with reams of paper, a lot of analytical data that they've collected from their department, and then manually trying to cross-correlate where did this breach occur, what was the flow or the path that the hacker took to get to the information that they had, what needs to be put in place to remediate that and prevent that from happening in the future. And that deals with that one particular incident, but it's not an overall holistic long-term strategy. And the impacts, it impacts the SLAs to your end customers, but also internal SLAs. The mean time to repair is slower outside of normal happenstance. It impacts your customer relationships, your supplier relationships. Workers are less productive when their systems aren't available to them operating efficiently. So these are really the opportunities for the MSPs because these environments are very common. These are the types of customers that we sell directly to, but we also have managed service providers creating value because they can bring a lot of expertise to these types of environments. So I'm going to reference a recent Black Hat survey where they asked, and the Black Hat people are typically the more technical IT professionals, folks that represent large corporations with large data centers. The question they asked them, what do you believe is going to be the greatest concern 2 years from now? So this is looking 24 months ahead of today. And the answers were, digital attacks, the Internet of Things, a very scary thing because there's some things we do know about that environment, but there's things we don't know that we don't know. We just don't know what might be impacting, if a copy pod is talking to, the thermostat, what types of things can happen to impact the network, both in terms of performance as well as any potential holes or backdoors to get into a network. Sophisticated attacks also being a problem, and espionage falling behind that. The next question the Black Hat team asked them, well, if that's your concern, how many of you are ready to deal with that? Do you have the staff to defend yourself? And clearly 73% said they do not have the sufficient security staff today. There was a recent Cisco article that published a million security jobs available in the U.S. today, 290,000, or I'm sorry, a million globally, 290,000 in the U.S. alone, because there just isn't enough trained personnel out there, and if they are, they're expensive. A lot of businesses can't afford that, so again, a huge opportunity for managed service providers to go in and add value to a business with those types of tools and capabilities. This next slide really kind of helps you to have a conversation with a customer or a business about network security. We tend to kind of call security as a bucket, a network as a thing, and I really push my salespeople as well as my managed service providers to have a deeper conversation with your end customer. So what is the network? what's living on the network, what applications are running, what happens if that application is not functioning properly, who cares, what's the material impact to the business. So really try to understand what it is you're trying to protect, not just the data that's on it, but what are all the systems that are touching that. Because all of those have organizational values about my brand, my reputation in the market, the financial integrity, the fiduciary responsibility to stakeholders. But it also has to deal with competitiveness. If you're getting breached, then you're likely pushing that customer to a different location to go shopping. Customers expect networks to be easily accessible, but also expect to have their data being private when they do shop with your business. So again, things to think about, driving the conversation outside of the IT shop, but more to a business solution, holistic approach to what it is that you're offering to the business. And just to kind of overemphasize the opportunity for managed service providers, Gartner, a big trusted source in the technology industry. So the information security market is growing pretty healthily, but the IT security outsourcing segment of that is growing year over year, 25%. So again, a really good opportunity if you're a service provider today wanting to look at security as a part of your overall service offering. So we'll focus on compliance. So security is a broad category. Compliance is a very common thing in many organizations. There are a number of types of compliance that managed service providers can help with. This list here is not completely comprehensive, but it's the majority of the ones that we see are companies that we do business with needing capabilities built into their solution for. I'll focus on PCI because it's really touching every single type of organization. PCI doesn't have a vertical necessarily. Anybody that's processing payment cards for transacting business, this applies to them. HIPAA is another category. Again, I mentioned the healthcare records being a strong target for hackers lately. So we're seeing an uptick in healthcare organizations looking for a solution such as what we offer to help them in remediating these, well, identifying the problems first, but then remediating any holes or problems they have in their current processes. So starting with PCI, again, it was developed by the payment card industry, meaning that to help the credit card industry back in 2006. They got tired of having to pay for all of these credit cards that had been breached, the hacker shopping with that. They were having to pay back the cardholder for all those lost wages or lost payments. So they kind of came together to coalesce a solution for building standards around how payment card data is collected, stored, processed, transmitted, and really how do you protect that financial data from outside. Primarily, the credit card companies still held the liability for that data, but as of October this last year, the liability has shifted from the card issuer to the merchant in that the new chip-based cards are required, as well as the point-of-sale readers, to deal with that. If the merchant doesn't have those in place, the liability falls on them, because then in that case the payment card issuer has taken the steps to ensure that security, but it wasn't being lived up to by that store or retail outlet. So to kind of frame the problem, looking at just 2015 alone, currently there was 1.24 billion payment cards in circulation, 15 million point-of-sale terminals. The credit card fraud in the U.S. alone last year was $10 billion. We're also seeing a shift to mobile payments, so people using their Apple Pay, PayPal, etc., becoming a big part of the economy now. And then the risks are non-compliance fines to businesses. So recently, a company called Genesco, a Nashville, Tennessee sportswear company, was fined by Visa for $13 million due to them not having the correct compliance standards in place to deal with processing payment card information. This next slide is really kind of the key data that you can help a business with. These are kind of common questions that many of our businesses have seen in terms of what an auditor is going to ask them when they're out on site trying to understand how this particular person is, or this business is dealing with PCI compliance. They need to have the answers to these questions. How do you validate that a user logging into the admin account was an authorized user? In other words, do you have a way to identify, even though that person was using the right credentials, where that user was logging in from? Was it an IP address that you were familiar with? Is it one of your standard database, or was it somewhere in, say the Ukraine or China that was accessing it with the right credentials but the wrong location? You need to also be able to answer what devices were added to your network between these particular dates, or yesterday, for example, because you need to have first of all, you need a standard topology that tells you what does my current environment look like, what components of that are related to PCI, how do those interconnect, and then has anything been added to the network, has anything been taken away from the network, how has that network environment changed, which is sometimes difficult for many IT departments to manage. How are you protecting PCI information from direct access to the internet? So you need to be able to have a topology map again that shows all the components that are in the PCI environment. Where does the internet plug into that environment? How are you gating traffic to and from that? Current topology maps for your PCI system, so you need, again, a strict environment that's looking just at that particular dashboard. And then what were the changes made to any firewalls recently, and who made those changes? You have the ability to look at the before configuration and the after configuration. Who made those changes? Were they authorized users? Those sorts of questions. And then to target HIPAA, it gets tagged mostly to the healthcare industry, but we have a number of higher education institutions where they have student health record data that is vulnerable to attack. HR departments in any organization, if they're sending information about, Sally's on vacation or taking some PTO because she's going through some cancer treatment, that type of data that's being stored in the network within any organization is considered healthcare HIPAA data that can be potentially breached. So yes, healthcare companies are a great target for that because they definitely have that kind of data, but there are a number of other institutions where that is resident that needs to be protected as well. So opportunities for you as MSPs. So I'll kind of run through a quick list of the things that you should have as a managed service provider to really add value to a business that really goes beyond what an IT shop might have today. Really the ability to support all infrastructure types, because you're going to be seeing physical broadband pipes that you're going to be touching, virtual environments with clouds, etc. Again, the bring your own device, wireless devices. The ability to have a great view and a comprehensive view of what the topology looks like, what are the applications that are running on that, how do those interrelate, what part of those are related, what part are PCI related, what are the overall organization's topology looking like. And then the ability to bring kind of network operation analytics and security operation analytics together under a single umbrella, a single view, single pane of glass, to give you the ability to quickly identify threats, but also the ability to quickly remediate those threats without a manual intervention. So these are kind of the wish lists that many of the MSPs that come to us say that that's what they're looking for. So again, the environment that I just talked about, you've got public clouds, private clouds, hybrid clouds, remote offices, work at home personnel. You've got local offices. You may even have a DMZ that you need to incorporate all into this environment. But you need a holistic view of what the network looks like to be able to be a trusted advisor in that area. You're also seeing a large proliferation of infrastructure types, people using Hyper-V or VMware, AWS, etc. That needs to be a part of that environment too, because those are also potential areas where a business can be hacked. And then a real-time CMDB, so you need the ability to not only map a current environment, understand all the interrelationships, but also be able to have that environment change in real time as that environment changes in real time. You need to be able to identify, did somebody come onto the network, go off the network? Is there a supplier that you're using in-house that's using resources that you either knew or didn't know about? Is there somebody hitting your Wi-Fi in the lobby and somehow getting past that? You need to be able to track that user as it goes through your business environment. Are they going from one Wi-Fi location to another Wi-Fi location? So all of that needs to be tracked in real time to be able to have a holistic view of an organization. And then comprehensive real-time analytics that are able to look at a number of different areas within the business, instances of data in your organization, metrics. What is the standard CPU utilization for a particular device? What's the standard memory utilization for a particular device? Are there triggers or alerts and alarms that need to be set when certain thresholds are met or going beyond? Are you monitoring the right things for managing compliance? Do you have the right security log data, et cetera? Synthetic transaction monitoring also should give you the ability to do what-if scenarios, the ability to say, here's a current PCI environment, I'm going to make these changes, let me look at that in a protected sandbox before I implement that into the network. You need to have that capability. And so this is really kind of the secret sauce that AccelOps brings, but it's also a tool that many managed service providers are implementing today, is really taking all these different disparate systems from different siloed environments, different siloed organizations, using tools that don't talk to each other, and bringing that together under a single pane of glass that really helps organizations to both in real time cross-correlate data a lot faster, but gives them a single viewing point for collecting the information, providing reports to their end users, and those can be as granular as IT needs down to the IP address, but also high-level reporting to upper management that shows performance over time in a graphical format. And then one other capability that's key to an MSP is the ability to carve their customers' networks into multiple components, what we call multitenancy. So really creating physical and virtual environments, taking components of the overall network topology, dragging them into a PCI compliance environment, for example, where it's just managing and reporting on the components associated with PCI, but also gives them the ability to look at the entire network overall holistically. So you may have a customer in multiple locations. You want to look at a physical location that's different from another location. It could be a single floor in a building and having the ability to look at a different floor, or the ability to carve out pieces of your customer or your entire customer base into manageable, reportable components. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Ryan. That's really kind of what it is that AccelOps brings and how we're helping MSPs today.
That is great, Mike, and obviously we've had a bunch of questions coming in. So this is something that I think is really maturing to a point finally in the industry where we have a formal answer, right? It's not like you pointed out in some of the history information, these kinds of compliance requirements aren't brand new, but they have been kind of hit and miss, or you deal with it one way, I deal with it with another, and we're starting to see enough standardization that we can build these kinds of platform services around it, and I find that to be very interesting. But at the same time, we're also finding that this kind of information is not nearly as widely disseminated in the channel as we need it to be. So just as an editorial comment there, I think this is very valuable and very timely. One question that I have for you, the first one that I was kind of focused in on, you mentioned the recent shift in the PCI compliance timeline. Back in October, the liability shifted. From a seller's point of view, from an industry analyst point of view, I think that should be a massive shift in urgency for the customers. Do you see that kind of urgency? I mean, is it well understood? Are end user organizations aware of that stuff? And have you seen an uptick since October in addressing these kinds of things?
We have seen an uptick, yes. I would say that the majority of, in our experience, the majority of payment card industry participants aren't either aware or aren't implementing plans yet for the new point-of-sale terminals that are required to shift that burden back to the card issuer. But it's becoming a big part of our security SIM solution, and probably the biggest selling component of that because of these changes that have happened. Both, and this, again, this is not just a U.S.-based problem. The PCI standards are a global, globally applied compliance standards body. So we're seeing both domestic and international drivers for this.
Well, and I think that's very important, right? Boundaries don't necessarily exist digitally the way they do geographically. So it's important to make sure that we know where our customers are doing business. One of the kind of knocks on the compliance approach to technology systems design for the last decade or so has been the question of enforcement. Well, HIPAA came out and we all thought, oh, it's going to sell a ton of software and compliance services because doctors don't want to suffer the consequences, but then there weren't actually a ton of consequences because enforcement was very lax or very delayed. As you're looking at it in terms of not just PCI, but some of the other compliance standards that are out there, are you seeing enforcement standards increased, or is it becoming more common? We heard some of the examples of people getting fines, but are those kind of still random spot occurrences, or are you starting to see where that's really becoming a trend to the norm?
Yeah, it's starting to. Well, what's been slow to happen is the oversight, and it's really been driven because they don't have the personnel to go after those folks that are not complying. There was a recent article, I think even today, that came out that the staff that manages HIPAA compliance for the government has received a large increase in funding to put additional resources in going after businesses that are breaching those compliance standards. So I see this becoming, over this year, becoming a huge potential problem for many businesses. I don't know if I went through the HIPAA fines, but there's just three in last year where one was a $4.8 million fine because the company was, or the hospital was breached due to a deactivated server. Another one was $1.7 million because they didn't have any technical safeguards in place. So that's another thing an MSP can bring, is really helping businesses understand what are the best practices, because it's not only just the systems to monitor and manage it, it's really helping to set the rules ahead of time as to what should be normal business practices in an environment where you're trying to manage PCI compliance or HIPAA compliance. You can really be a trusted advisor in setting up best practice policies and standards, helping the businesses run through those on a regular basis just to make sure that their employees are complying, which really then helps the reporting process, because you can go back and say, here's the rules that were broken, or here's how they were broken. So it really gives you a really good way to add additional value, more sticky relationships with the business.
Yeah, and those kinds of ongoing service relationships are above and beyond the question of security. They are a business retention device as well. So I think that's a very interesting point. One of the things that comes up in the questions we've seen here, the complexity of the roster of compliances. Do you guys have, or are you familiar with what I'll term it a matrix type of an approach to where these regulations tend to overlap in certain industries, right? Like you mentioned, a doctor's office is going to have HIPAA, there's going to be records management, there's going to be transactional processing and PCI, right? Are you familiar with a resource where we might be able to find that kind of matrix overlap of, for financial services, these are all of the challenges for medical, et cetera?
That is something I don't currently have my hands on. That's a great idea, though, and something I should probably develop. But I would say the PCI touches pretty much any business that's doing any sort of transactions over the internet, for sure, and then in person. But as you mentioned, HIPAA can touch any particular business who's got an HR department. So a lot of those cross. And then I mentioned the higher ed, where they have HIPAA, PCI, FERPA, federal records protection standards. There are a number of businesses that have 3 or 4 or 5 compliance standards that they have to support across a pretty wide spectrum.
Yeah, I find that's, I mean, in real world application. I recently had a visit to the dentist, and they have the standard form that you sign on the HIPAA records disclosure, and that it's okay for them to track your information, and here's a definition of how they handle it. And I actually happened to mention, hey, I don't see a PCI compliance form here for my signature. Or, how should I feel comfortable about processing my credit card with you guys? And literally the office manager looked at me like deer in the headlights, in no form of recognition or understanding whatsoever. She was like, you mean there's more regulation? That's going to blow up our minds. So that's definitely overlapping regulations that I think a managed service provider with a continuous contract relationship is in a unique position to be able to address. One of the questions that came in here from one of our live participants today, pricing structures for this kind of service. Are you seeing that compliance as a service is something that is bundled into an all-you-can-eat type of a managed service contract? Is it priced additionally? Do you have any kind of sense of what an appropriate price point would be for adding this kind of service to a managed relationship?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those it depends customer or questions because we have MSPs offering a full suite of services, some that are just targeting PCI compliance. So one example is SIM as a service, so security overall, managing potential for threat, looking at the entire organization. Some that are just offering PCI compliance, so really just looking at the network components that are germane to the PCI environment, providing the end customer with daily, weekly, monthly reports. And in some cases, the managed service provider is just sending an email or paging somebody or calling somebody saying, here's a problem, to others that are doing the remediation, saying, I see this breach happening, I see this problem happening, I as the MSP am going to take proactive measures to fix that, and that's part of the service that I sell to that end user. So it's a pretty wide spectrum. The tool that we provide comes pre-configured with a number of different compliance reports built in, so it's easy to get up and running on any of those or all of those. And then we also have the ability, a lot of our customers that are managed service providers that we work with today use the PAM or the performance application monitoring management functionality, and now they're adding the security side of the house to their offerings to give them a more strategic engagement with those end customers. So it really kind of depends. There's a number of customers out there today. I'll throw out Megapath. They're a long-standing customer of ours that sell a PCI compliance as a service today. There's a number of them that are growing. We're actually considering doing it ourselves because we have so many direct customers coming to us. For the same reasons I talked about in the beginning of the slide deck, is that there's such a demand for security personnel, security expertise, and people are having a hard time finding that and are looking for solutions in the market today. So I would say, to answer the question directly, it's really up to you as the managed service provider how deep and wide you want to go into that organization. So it could be just generic reports that you can push out on a monthly basis and just charge for those reports. It could be managing the customer's topology, the CMDB. That's part of our product offering as well. So again, I think the sky is the limit in terms of what you can add to the solution.
Yeah, that's the variations are all over. I will say from our research, we've certainly seen more specific engagement offerings outside of the core all-you-can-eat arrangement focused on compliance management in the last year. That kind of indicates to us that is something that customers are becoming more aware of and more willing to pay for, specifically, like you mentioned, in the form of an audit trail and reporting justification. That kind of documentation is something that if they get audited, if there is a question and they don't have the paperwork to back it up, or if that paperwork happens to be buried among a lot of other reports associated with virus and malware and system uptime and performance, et cetera, it can be really difficult to go dig through the stack of reports and find that stuff. So exclusive reporting and documentation for compliance purposes under a separate signed agreement, that's becoming much more popular. Another thing that I'd like to get your input on, the documentation of standards, that written policy and report. We've seen a lot of action around that becoming a product or service that that an MSP can do as kind of a first step into the relationship. Are you aware of or familiar with any kind of typical information that needs to go into those standards? Do you guys happen to have any list of here's best practices and what a policy or documentation should look like?
Yeah, there are a number of different online. So SANS is a good source for building compliance policies. The PCI Compliance world also has its own website that does have a lot of best practices. If you go to PCI, it's PCISecurityStandards.org. They've got a number of resources, both to get you educated, but also in helping you define best practices and solutions for your end customers to help you become an expert in that particular area. But it really ranges depending on the compliance type as to what that looks like. But one of the added benefits of really doing PCI compliance is that it really makes you look as a customer at your network and all the different components attached to the network. So by default, you kind of polish your own network across the board by adding PCI compliance monitoring and management, because it helps you put in the right practices ahead of time that will help you with other aspects of your organization that need to be better managed network solutions that are a better fit for your organization beyond that.
Great. And I'll tell you, from a systems integration point of view, that becomes a real question whenever the term real-time starts to come up, right? As you mentioned, the network topography map being current that's a very loose term, right? In terms of, well, is it current for this quarter, this month, this week? Are you tracking it in real time? Help me understand a little in terms of, we had a couple of questions come in on that CMDB topic. That software for tracking that stuff, is that built into your offering, or is that a separate resource that you recommend? And what's the reporting structure on that? Are there automated reports that can, say, alert for changes or for violations, et cetera?
Yeah, I didn't get too specific on the product, and I do suggest folks that want more information, please sign up for a demo. But the CMDB is really one of our more powerful engines in the environment. Essentially, day one, when you purchase our solution, you plug in a range of IP addresses, applications, and credentials. Our tool will go out and explore proactively all the different devices attached to the network, their specific IP addresses, their model number, their current version of software, etc. It'll build you a topology map that's kind of a fishbone or a regular topology map. It'll also geo-plot it, so it'll tell you where that physical device is located, and that kind of builds the baseline for what does the current environment look like today. But our CMDB is constantly pinging the network and looking for changes to that environment and reporting on any changes to that environment. I think one of the other questions you got is about changes to the configuration. One of the PCI examples that I give, which was a real-life example, we had a network administrator go on vacation. She went to Hawaii. We did notice that a firewall had been entered. The right credentials were used. It was that person that was in Hawaii. However, that IP address happened to be from the Ukraine, so that triggered an alarm. So even though it was a successful login, there wasn't a brute force attempt. It was the right person going to the right place. The IP address we knew was a bad actor. So we also had the ability to look at what configuration, what was the configuration before that individual entered that firewall, what did they change, and then have the ability to roll back to the original environment, which again is a critical tool in the PCI compliance standards is the ability to look at those types of things, show how you remediate it. Well, first of all, how did you identify it, and then what steps did you take to remediate that, and then you've got the audit tools then to help back that up. So the CMDB is a part of our overall offering, is a short answer.
Okay, and that, as you mentioned, the complexity and sophistication of those questions has multiplied significantly in terms of the last couple of years. So it's definitely a time and a place where we need automation and tool integration. On the tool integration topic, in your systems environment, considering other MSP tools we might have, whether it's RMM or PSA capabilities, other systems that might be deployed at the end user level, what is your compatibility strategy?
I mean, the things we integrate with today that might be in an MSP's environment is, I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but ServiceNow is a big component of our reporting tool capability, where alarms and alerts will generate tickets. ConnectWise is another one that's commonly used. But we're collecting data and log information from any device that is attached to the network. So the parsing part of that is the more tricky part. So we're traditionally looking at tier 1, tier 2 hardware vendors, but we do some one-off things for specific customers, specific needs. We even had one customer looking to get reports on Salesforce.com utilization, which we baked into the tool as well. But it's a pretty wide spectrum.
Yeah, the Salesforce.com compliance just made all the blood run cold for all the sales guys out in our audience. So it's good to know that that's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah.
As you're looking at kind of contracts and engagements with customers, when we get into questions about business agents and meaningful use and stuff like that, are there standardized contracts that you guys are familiar with for how an MSP can arrange not just the end user policies, but the actual business relationship for these kinds of services with a customer?
We don't have anything that we have out of the box that we recommend. I mean, we're happy to talk to you one-on-one in terms of how others are doing it today. We've got some that are delivering the service on-premise at the customer site. We've got some that are delivering it through Azure or AWS. So it's some on a case-by-case basis, but there's some generic structures that we'd be happy to have a conversation with you guys about.
Okay. And one question came in, as you had touched on earlier, your go-to-market strategy and the way that you work with MSPs. I'm sure that there's obviously a lot of additional detail in terms of channel programs and tiers, et cetera, but specifically focused on direct sales. Is there a kind of market architecture that you've drawn about where you do sell direct, where you rely on MSPs? Is there any kind of channel sales map according to that structure that you guys use?
Yeah, so we've got three different channels of sales. We have an inside sales team that take leads from our website, and we sell directly to those end customers that come through the web. We've also got an outside sales team that tend to focus on the larger enterprises, so Staples being a good example of that. But then we also have a global channel that we enable and sell through. Some white label our solutions, some make it apparent as to what they're offering. But in those cases, we're enabling those MSPs through training them on the product, helping them with the marketing materials, helping them to look at specific verticals and what particular pain points might be for those verticals, helping them with best case or use case scenarios, and customer satisfaction ratings that we've seen based on certain practices that we've put in through those MSPs. So it's across the spectrum. So we're happy to have the MSPs, happy to help them. We've got training materials available, a robust channel with marketing materials. We're happy to go on site to help enable that team as well, and look for ways to jointly go after business.
Okay, that is great. And certainly in addition to the questions about product functionality that will be addressed via a demo. Is the contact information that we have up there the same in terms of exploring the channel business relationship? Is that through you, or are there different contacts?
No, they can certainly come through me. I'll also throw a commercial out there too. We'll be attending RSA this year. We're offering free passes, so if you want to meet us up at the RSA show, we'll be there demoing our current solution, but some future things that will be announced ahead of that show that might be compelling from an MSP's perspective as well.
Absolutely, certainly becoming ground start number one for the security industry. More and more, that RSA conference is vital. So good to know that there are times and places to actually meet in person. In terms of the way that you guys are actually seeing the market evolve, are there other specific focus opportunities beyond PCI and HIPAA that apply to certain vertical industries? I'm kind of thinking about, the evolution in ISO standards and manufacturing quality and things like that. Are you starting to see other areas of focus beyond our kind of like the most popular 2 or 3?
Yeah, the list that I showed earlier are the canned or baked reports that we've got, but ISO definitely is becoming more and more, especially in our European market, 2701, 2702, becoming more and more a part of what's required to manage the security environment. That is something that's very near term for an additional bundle of reporting options that we'll have in our bag of tricks. We've got some today, but we're beefing that up because of the European market specifically that's asking for that. But just the security, breach detection, threat detection market itself has just been growing like crazy. And you see, no organization is immune to the attacks. So it's, PCI and HIPAA are kind of a toe in the water, but the solution that we offer and others in our same space really provide opportunities for MSPs to go after a number of different ways to add value in the security space, because it's a big pain point for many businesses, as I showed earlier, that they just don't have the expertise to deal with.
Yeah, in fact, the many businesses comment is something that we've been seeing in our research as well. There were a number of questions that came in today about target audience profiles and, which verticals or which customers are most likely to need these kinds of resources. So some recent research that we did actually found that the answer is basically all of the above, which is unfortunate, but it's also pretty lucrative, right? Because small businesses are much less likely to have deployed systems and resources, but large businesses are subject to more regulations and also tend to be targets for more frequent attacks. And so we found that when we measured it in terms of how urgent and vital the security protocols are to businesses, multiplied by how lucrative that opportunity can be for an MSP, we found, pretty much a straight line, and that was kind of a surprise to us. But what it says is there's still an awful lot of fresh powder out there where we have not gone to the end customer and covered all of their issues, or if we are in there, we've not dealt with all of the regulations, all of the requirements that are associated. So we've not seen any pockets where they are the most urgent, but we've seen urgency increase pretty much across the board.
Yeah, it's an interesting environment. As networks change and morph, which is happening more and more frequently, businesses are trying to stay competitive. They're trying to make sure that when a customer comes to their website, it's functioning properly, that they can trust leaving their credit card there. Mergers and acquisitions, bringing different components into a network that weren't thought through. You've got disparate sources of information, so as that becomes more complex to manage, it's much more value that you can bring to a business in making that easy for them.
Yeah, in fact, from a business driver point of view, we've actually found that conversation to be more valuable guidance from a sales targeting point of view, less than the target audience that they're dealing with, more what's happening in the business. And like you said, mergers and acquisitions, or launching new physical retail locations, or deploying a new e-commerce business model, things like that, that if a customer does those things on the business side, it's almost certain they're going to introduce new and unfamiliar security requirements, and that's the time to make sure we're addressing those with our customers.
Yeah, and that's why I really try to get people to look at what are the things that are running on the network, to bring other departments into the decision-making process, help them help you to build your case to get the security measures you need in place, because if they've got a business strategy that might be impacted by some sort of security flaw that they might not even have thought through or been aware of, you as an IT professional can add more value to your end customer, but the person that you're talking to at that business site can also add more value within his business by having the tools to say, here's how I'm protecting your Salesforce environment or your HR system, or we've added this new business to our network. Here's the things I'm putting in place to make sure that none of those things are going to impact our normal day-to-day stuff that's already working great. You've got tools to do that.
Yeah, and in fact, I will say, just in closing here, in terms of a target sales strategy that we learned from a solution provider recently that is specifically in this space that I thought was very, very interesting. The board of directors for an end customer organization has, kind of the legal and business strategy purpose of not just guiding the business activities in the right direction, but ensuring stability, compliance, and all those, what not just legal but fiduciary requirements. And boards of directors tend to be almost clueless these days on security and compliance requirements. And so while they may be pressuring a business to move into new markets or new business models, they're not proactively examining compliance of current activities or adding compliance as an additional layer. So this solution provider was targeting end users not at the IT department level, but via their board of directors, and asking, what is your compliance audit process? What are your criteria that you examine for new business initiatives? And they found a lot of really good feedback from the board members, but those board members carry tremendous weight and credibility with the end user decision makers. So, boy, that was a really good sales prospecting tool for them. So I wanted to make sure that folks here were aware of that kind of an approach. It's everywhere, but it's our job to kind of go out and seek out the opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great strategy, and many, many boards now, I think it's still less than half, but high 40s% wise are now getting engaged in security decisions for the business because of the potential impacts to the brand, revenue streams, et cetera.
Yeah, from a risk terminology point of view, we heard it that it's been escalated to the category of survivability factors, and I thought that terminology sounded very impressive. So definitely wanted to make sure people are focused there. The time has come to the top of the hour, so Mike, thank you very much for all the information and for all of the questions and answers here as well. For those of you that are with us live, we will actually be providing a summary of all those questions to Mike, and if there were any that didn't get answered, he'll be able to do some follow-up there. So thank you very much for submitting all of your great questions throughout today's conversation. In addition to this conversation, obviously this is part of an ongoing series of Channel Expert Hour conversations that we host. The next one that is on the calendar is actually scheduled for the 17th of this month, and it is focused on debunking some of the myths on business and technology questions around the MSP business model. So if you'd like to get additional information on that or the ongoing list of future activities, you can go to thebarguy.com and find under the webcast tab a list of the future calendar there. So thank you, everybody, very much for joining us for today's conversation. We appreciate it, and we will wrap up here and let you guys go back to your regular work day. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Ryan.